Okay, so I'm just gonna try to spur the moment finish all these books that I read in 2024, all the sundry different things. So I believe since the camera died, and not the camera died, but my battery uh drained somehow. But I think ended off in July, and what I read in July was, and I think I left off at the unbearable lightness of being, normal people, Sally Rooney, the Jaguar Smile, Salman Rushdie. I think I mentioned that. Okay, so yeah, that the Jaguar Smile was like kind of it was a more journalistic thing. It wasn't like a fiction. It was just nonfiction kind of him inquiring about and the um kind of unrest and the civil unrest of like I can't remember the country, but anyway, so and then I last thing I read was I Wished by Dennis Cooper. I think I read a couple of his books. Pretty interesting. I think I just kind of off chance heard of spontaneously rather heard of him via someone that commented of a thread of something of different kind of creative fiction stuff like that was a little bit similar to like Joyce Carol Oates, and I guess I could see a little bit that comparison. Um, I'm not even sure because it was so. I just heard the name and I was like, well, I guess I'll add him to the list too. So I ended up, since it was only a 3 hour thing, it's really interesting. I'm not sure if I'll ever fully do a review, but the gist of it is that it's like told in kind of a almost kind of uh, in a way that's a little bit like Richard Brautigan or Kurt Vonnegut, in the sense of like starting off with the gist, or rather starting off with like kind of a narrative that doesn't really seem to be all that, not a nested narrative, but like a through the lens of different first person characters and unreliable narrators and all these interwoven kind of uh, stories that somehow come to a head. They actually come together in some meaningful way, and I think a lot of it, a good amount of it, is revolves around Nick Drake in a way, like the artist, the singer songwriter Nick Drake, his own tragic um, life. He passed away, I believe, at 26. Just really, a super young, talented guy that suffered with depression and melancholy, and that's like evident in his songs. And and I wished Dennis Cooper kind of pays homage to that by kind of the characters being like a fan of Nick Drake and like listening to uh, his records and stuff as a form of solace. Um, but yeah, some of it reminded me a bit of like Murakami, the way that Murakami like integrates like music into his stuff too. Like he'll have characters like listening to anything from Prince, like in something like blasting Prince in your headphones, and then on the other hand, also listening to like more like very sophisticated classical music as well. And like Murakami is kind of an aficionado, kind of knows a lot about that stuff, and like a lot of his characters are like kind of snobs in that sense, not in a bad way, but in a good way, I think. But he'll like in first person singular, I think he mentioned it was not Strauss, Schumann. It was Robert Schumann, who also had a equally talented wife named Clara Schumann. And Robert Schumann also had a kind of almost a Nick Drake kind of end to his life too. Not to just focus on just the most worst aspects of someone's life, but like he's actually kind of, I think, communicated very well in a articulated through a, I think, I didn't know this until semi recently. Somebody did a kind of video essay on it on a Radiohead Pyramid Song. It was like talking about echoing stuff about being on the river, in the river, drowning in a river, and I think that was like kind of obliquely referencing Robert Schumann. But yeah, I did listen to some of his stuff, like Carnival, I think it was called, by because of Murakami. So you definitely, like, I like the aspect of that, and then also like in the Wind Up Bird Chronicles, like referencing the Magpie, the Thieving Magpie by darn, the Italian opera. The pretty, I can't remember the name, but he references all these different people. So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell what kind of my thoughts about those kind of references, interdimensional, or rather intertextual, I guess. Um, Sputnik Sweetheart. Hey, speak of the devil. Haruki Murakami. I did a review on this. Really loved it. Probably one of my favorites by him. Billy Budd Harmon review. The Resurrection by Leo Tolstoy. I think I did a review on this as well. Grand Union by Zadie Smith. That's one of her kind of essay, not essay like things, but I think she mentions during COVID. I think so. It was like semi recently, not too far away. Oh gosh, but it's also going on 5 years now, isn't it? So I guess but I think it wasn't. I could be wrong, but I think Grand Union. She was like, I don't know, like I loved it, but like I can't really remember like what it was about. Um, but anyway, so um, discourse on human nature. David Hume, obviously David Hume, the ought is and all that stuff, and I didn't really get a shot of it, just like I with the Ethics by Spinoza, some really really integral, like very important, pertinent ideas that that should be cherished and how but I just can't, in a way, I think there's something Bart Ehrman said this really interestingly in a video I saw, like a clip of him on Alex O'Connor, I think. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but Within Reason, I think it's called. I occasionally listen to the Bart Ehrman thing. The most recent thing he did with him, I think, was Ehrman was mentioning how reading texts like Gnostic texts are like very. It's like you'll can't make heads or tails of it, but like when somebody else kind of talks about it and explicates on it and talks about all the bigger picture themes, overall things, like a more well versed scholar, I guess, on those specific texts, the more it's like it's way more edifying. It's like a lot more like, oh, I see what's going on there. Whereas like when you're actually trying to read it, so that's how I felt about a lot of these philosophy texts I read. Like whether it's something as needlessly complicated as Hegel, or I'm sorry, not necessarily Hegel. I got more out of Hegel than I did with Kant. But when I have other people explaining it, it's like, oh yeah, that's Hegel, or Kant was actually getting at this, and the a priori, you know a truth on is this same on two sides of the universe or something, and then the a posteriori kind of after post, um and then I'm just certain things like that, and the way people put it is like actually a lot more interesting. um Makes a lot more sense. So yeah, the Regrets of Mortality by Christopher Hitchens. He's talking about when he was um diagnosed with his I believe it was a lung, or is it liver cancer? I think it was lung cancer, I think. And Nin by Vladimir Nabokov. Breasts and Eggs by Miyake Kawakami. Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Intimations by Zadie Smith. That might have been the one that I was talking about. That was She was talking about COVID, and then she was referencing this meme that she kind of eloquently put in, a lot more eloquently, where she was talking about how a lot of people like during the pandemic were talking about how it was like, or kind of like Mel Gibson being lectured by, or I'm sorry, it was the other way around. It was The Passion of the Christ, the movie. And it was Jim Caviezel being like lectured by him, and like it was like how I feel about being lectured by these older people, like kind of um about my the health and stuff, and like like this is the new normal and stuff like that, or but she put that in a pretty interesting kind of way. So anyway, Autumn by Ali Smith. She was one of the many authors, the 10 authors that did the in occasion went in search of its bird. I think the 10 Kafka stories. So I think I pre-ordered that because I was like, so it was one of the few things. I almost want to say I actually pre-ordered Antkind because it was like I remember hearing about it. I guess like the year it came out, like just about, but then I didn't get it. I didn't get to it till like almost a year after it came out. So it was like I was just too intimidated. But Mysterious Affair at Styles. That was like Agatha Christie. I just wanted to get kind of more into that. I think it's just the one book I've ever read, just because I kept hearing about detective kind of mystery thriller, kind of wrap your head around things, and like ooh, and A Man Without a Country by Kurt Vonnegut. It's an interesting kind of series of essays. I'm slowly working my way through his stuff. I'm not sure if I'd say like I'm a mega fan. I'm just on a personal. Maybe those are just my personal biases. A lot of these are biased stuff. Like a lot of these things are like you'll see like I'll talk about something like ooh like the Shawl by Cynthia Ozak or which is next. I'll talk about that for because it just resonated with me. But then other things like Everyman by Philip Roth, I just like I don't know. I just don't really feel like it connected on a personal level that much. I felt like it was okay. It was okay, you know. But yeah. So after that, the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Casey. I think I feel bad because I actually read a slightly abridged version of that, and it was like only about a little over half of the actual full size novel, and I just irritating because it's like it didn't say in like the preface or anything like that it was an abridged version. But there, I will definitely have to get back to that because I just don't want to like put down a book that I read and be like, I read it. But at the same time, it's also maybe um, the stuff that other stuff that I've read, like something by uh, Joyce Carol Oates or Ali Smith. Some of those things are like less than 4 hours or 3 hours, so it's like kind of like I don't know. It adds up, and I don't know if that's like the best metric um for sizing these things up is like I think it's just a personal thing. It's more subjective, I guess. Um, than page number because page number alone because like there are things that can resonate me very very much a lot more than say a huge thick historical like kind of exhaustive historical thing uh maybe about like I don't know like World War II or American history or something but like that stuff is like I might not personally remember because it's like it's not told in a way that's impactful for me. So yeah, The Elements of Style by Professor William Strunk. I think I might have mentioned this in passing. I didn't put a review because it's just it's the elements of style. It's like a grammatical kind of thing, and I just want to get into a little bit into the headspace of grammar, and even if it's just not advanced, it's just beginning kind of rudimentary grammar like clauses and stuff like that, or intensifying stuff or transitive verbs or and all that kind of stuff. Where I feel like painfully like a few years back I realized just how much stuff I didn't really going into it like I didn't really know a lot about like I just didn't know as much as you think I would as somebody who would like to think of themselves as a writer. But then again, I don't think that these should be the main indicators of just like oh it's just because a lot of what Strunk was saying was like cleaning stuff up, making sentences less uh, like overly saturated with like needless clauses and different and corollaries or different things and like you're just connecting them with so many different property or different things that they don't need at the core, I guess. So The Great Poets by Gerard Manuel Hopkins. That was just um, the title of a collection of his poetry. A few hour read of his very beautiful poetry. Very solemn. He didn't live much till his 40s, and he actually, I'm not sure if it was tuberculosis, but he talked a lot about the kind of like lower class, the aspect of like the working farm life of like the Englishman circa like 19, late 18th or sorry, late 19th century, I think. So he would have been, he might have passed away. I think like I could be totally wrong, but like 1920s maybe, but I'm not sure. But yeah, he some of his stuff kind of reminded me a little bit of D.H. Lawrence's kind of um, sentiment that was toward like the um, working class, like like a lot, like a pretty like a compassionate, like empathetic kind of sentiment towards the more unsung people that weren't like in the aristocratic kind of like comfortable elitist upper class society, the affluent of England, especially with all its like different um, like uh, it's a very convoluted history, but of royalty and stuff. So in the in the Ides of different I'm not sure where that thought was going, but yeah. After that, I read Foxfire, Joyce Carol Oates, Everyman by Philip Roth, The Soft Machine by William S. Burroughs. I'm not sure what to think. Like William S. Burroughs, like I'll hear people talk about him great enthusiasm. There's like two. Well, there's actually just one. I think Burroughs adaptation. With directed by Luca Guadagnino. Luca, I'm gonna butcher this. Luca Guadagnino. Luca Guadagnino. With the screenplay by Justin Kritzky, who's like makes hilarious YouTube videos of like the potion seller, the meme of the potion seller. I thought was really, still holds up, pretty funny. And he's like a playwright too, so he has like a lot of a keen kind of observations on like writing and getting to the character's headspace and stuff like that. So I haven't seen the movie yet, but it's based off Queer, the novel by Burroughs, and I'm slowly working my way. So I'm eventually gonna get to Queer, and I might just kind of wait, kind of take my time getting to it, and then read that and then watch the movie afterward. But the Soft Machine, uh, yeah, it's like kind of science fiction, but it's like the soft, it's like it's about his own opioid addiction too, which he goes in depth in with the Naked Lunch too, which is Kerouac came up with the name of that title for him in a letter, I think. And yeah, but I liked Naked Lunch. It went into some pretty dark spaces that were just really hard to listen to, but so did the Soft Machine. But it went a little bit too much into that kind of underbelly of like of this kind of imagined world, like of this world of, or of just endless addiction or endless, sexual perversions and licentiousness going on, calamity everywhere. It just seems like Burroughs dwells in that space a little bit too much for my taste. But then again, I'm also pretty soft, kind of thin-skinned when it comes to certain books like Georgia Bataille, The Story of the Eye, and all that. But or Michel Houellebecq, I cannot get into him at all. He's just way too just dark into the darkness. Like of whether it's in Serotonin, where he's just like endless darkness, just like endless like this and that, and then my sister had sex with a dog and then filmed it. It's like, okay, we get it. Your life was miserable. You're like, okay, sorry. But as somebody who has periods of depression too, I totally get some of that. But the never ending kind of just it's a vibe thing. I get it. I hate the word vibe for the most part, but I think it hits home for some of these books or these, or it's just like I can never quite get into them. But some people are just like, man, Michelle Welbeck. I'll still read what's it called? Sublimate, no, Submission, because I heard some, but I know it's very provocative too, but it's like got a lot of anti-Muslim backlash, and I just kind of interested in that. Maybe for the same reason I kind of got interested in Salman Rushdie, just to hear what he's talking about, because it's like it's almost like a child when a mother is like, oh, you shouldn't read this or something, and then it's like, oh, they kind of like in the whole like nobody should do anything too offensive for Muslim. I'm not trying to be too prodding and doing stuff like that just for the sake of it, but like I kind of have a bit of that kind of like curiosity that's more so almost infantile in some ways. It's like it's just like being told not to open a cookie jar and then doing it anyway. So I kind of feel about certain books, and then finding out that that initial curiosity wasn't enough to substantiate any, like, not it wasn't enough to draw me in, because it was just kind of in the moment ephemera, I guess. So after that, it was Darkness at Noon by Arthur Gessler. I'd like to read more of his stuff as well. A lot of first for me in this year. How Can I Help by Paul Gorman and Ram Dass. Very lovely kind of anecdotes in there as I try to go in and out of my phases of Buddhism and Eastern mystical kind of teaching and the Occidental kind of ideas of suffering and suffering everywhere and impermanence too. Like just everything is impermanent, and I think Japan and countries like that kind of have very solid like um, exception. Like they accept that and they give more credence to those things, more value, and they not in a way that's like obsessive where it's like, oh, but it's more like, yeah, this too shall pass. And there are in How Can I Help, it was more like a practical kind of guide that in Paul Gorman and Ram Dass were talking about all these anecdotes about how can you kind of make something less convoluted, less and emancipate yourself from the needless suffering of things. And like he talked about how, I think this is, I don't know if it was Ram Dass saying this, where he was talking about how in Aikido, this is probably one of my favorite ones. It shows up in Becoming Nobody, I think. I think that's what got me into that. But yeah, he was talking about Aikido training. In any martial arts, you're told how to defend yourself. Like it's like a stereo. It's the default kind of there's no way around. That's what you're doing. Like if you're doing jujitsu, or you're doing the most, even like with Aikido, where it's like more like, despite what Steven Seagal might have you say of like, of just like completely butchering different Zen koans. And I'm not gonna do an impression. I'm not gonna really. Yeah, I don't really have the mood for it right now. But yeah, he's definitely not really. He's just a kind of silly, kind of funny guy. And if he is acting at it, Steven Seagal, like he's hilarious. Like it's a hilarious long con. But aside from that, he's just kind of I don't know. I think there's been enough said on him. But yeah, he is like Aikido, and he was learning how to defend himself. And there's this dilemma of like how do you get out of this mode of constantly just like looking for the next, because in doing that there's like there's a lot of baggage you're carrying. You're like carrying like fears and paranoias about what people might do. And then he was talking about how, as a younger guy, he was going around and he was learning that, and like putting in hours a day to perfect himself at that. And that he was also had in the back of his head like you know a Zen kind of mindset of like, but it wasn't. But he forgot to put love at the forefront of what he was doing. So he was like talking about how, and obviously this is a wildly um, truncated gist, but he said how he was looking, and there was somebody who was a man on I believe it was a homeless guy, kind of a beggar on the street that was getting very kind of worked up, and like was like going around and was like threatening to do stuff to certain people. So threatening to um, kind of uh, endanger people. And then he got up, and then I was talking about how he was going to kind of sort himself out. He's going to kind of sort the situation out. And he's going to be like, I'm going to take care of this guy. Um, and I was like really trying to kind of do it as a way of just kind of almost just as a proving how like the masculine kind of whatever, I guess, his competency, I guess. And he goes up to kind of look heroic and all that, but then he walks away, or he walks up and then notices how um, the man was no longer going around violently, and then was just sitting there, and then very like downcast, crestfallen, and then he starts talking to him, and then the man just pours out all these feelings, and he's like, I just was like, had a I had an abusive family, or I grew out of a really dark household, and I grew up, and I grew up with no parental figures, and um, and he was going about how like he felt himself to be kind of like rudderless, without like any like anchorage to anything. And he felt like the only way to like for people to notice him was to kind of lash out. Uh and then Ram Dass, I think at this point realizes that his flaw was what could have been dealt with Aikido. I soon learned was best dealt with love, I think, was the approximation. What he said, obviously put a lot better than that. And he talks, and I do notice this trend of a proclivity of all of us. All of us have a kind of inclination to kind of like defend or do the right thing, and the right thing seems to almost always entail, if it's like in the external world, kind of whether it's on a subway, or whether it's in the street, or public spaces. This is coming from somebody who's out in the country, so it's kind of hard for me to kind of fully identify and emphasize with this, but it's definitely an endemic of our world, increasingly more modern we get with like interface and technology and all that, the more hate breeds hate, and the more but love also breeds love. So it's like kind of a and love is kind of a throwaway term a lot, and it's very hard for me to pinpoint what exactly I mean by that. But love in an all encompassing, unconditional way. It's not in a Zen way. I think it's more consistent, because it's not like love and romantic love where it's like there's like a limerence, I think the word, or like a longing for the physical intimacy. But love in a Zen way is just like total acceptance. It's just like total lack of um concern of what uh, concern of what other people might think of you, or complete just unconditional, just like compassion in a way that's practical, that's like lived out. You can like live this out. Like love is something where you can just take down all the barriers and preconceptions about something, and then just completely accept this person. And it's like that is, really good, and it's rare. It's just sad that so many people, myself included, can only really feel this on like very ephemeral trips like LSD, D8, or on DMT, or and I haven't tried, but like it's just psychedelics, or maybe for other people maybe pot or whatever. It's just like but it's something that where for all of us to do this, there's always like a condition, like we have to feel like we're like we're not good enough, or we don't. But I like how thoughtfully they Paul Gorman and Ram Dass put this. But it's like a thing where I see a lot of people kind of this radicalization of the which is why like I'm so often irked, and just by these conservative kind of voices who placate, or not placate, but they'll take things like incidents like on the subway with can't remember the name of the guy, but the young African American who was taken kind of into a head thing and choked out. And he was like choked out by this Marine Corps guy, a young man who was like thought he was doing the right thing, and then but he like so many other times, like so many countless times we see, is like it's always somebody overstepping their bounds, trying to be the hero, trying to, ooh, I'm just doing the right thing, hoorah. And you're like, no, you're like, you should step back, but like, you don't get it. What if, and this is what I hate. I don't really, I don't know why I'm playing this up, but it's like, the thing I hate though is like, I'm trying to be, use that word less, here, but, this word, the, what I really don't get is people who they'll up the situation to a like more extraneous kind of more extreme dramatic kind of utilitarian thing, like, what if you were at a trolley, and it's like, well, most of the time people don't have to deal with that, that's kind of an realistic kind of thing. But if I'd say you have to stick to some kind of, I guess, Kantian kind of ethic of treating people's not as ends in themselves, but as in some universal way that actually has a thought, and in a way that's like you're not in a way that if was universalized would be reprehensible. So if you have everybody going about and just choking people out, then we'd have like so many hell on earth and death, people just dying everywhere, just like victims of violence, because violence doesn't solve anything, and people keep on doing the Luigi Manjo anything, and it's just like, okay, well, they'll just up it slightly more, and it's like it's with Crime and Punishment. It's like with Dostoevsky and Raskolnikov. It's like, but what if this woman, this pawnbroker, she's so evil, right? And it's like, yes, but you've utilitarianly you've intellectually won the argument, but there's just this very like more godly, saintly approach of just humanistic approach, explored with like Camus, or uh, Sartre, I think, some at some points, where it's like you can't really, it like no matter how many times you try upping it, like, well, what if in that situation in the subway there were just uh like the guy that was like losing his mind, probably because he had mental illness, and like, and he was just lashing out, and just like his thing where it's like all the conservative voices, Ben Shapiro, like complete fraud and a basically a coward. I just can't stand him. And he's basically saying that the guy deserved to die for potentially endangered lives, even though the guy didn't do anything but yell and cause kind of a ruckus, which basically happens if you're in the city in certain inner cities all the time. But since Ben Shapiro has never been outside in the real world, has never worked at a factory, never done anything of like all the working class conservatives, he's a total intelligentsia, pseudo intelligentsia, lack of remorse, complete, profoundly embellished fraud. But most of the Daily Wire is a complete like atrocity of human humanity. They're all bankrupt, wheeling out, just shilling out endlessly for just capitalism or Israel or just the new thing or whatever. It's just whatever. I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, you'll just keep upping it. You have to keep upping the intensity of the scenario, and it's like, well, what if he had a gun? It's like, what if he had, and then you're just like, well, I guess then you would have to. It's like you're because the thing that people want to hear that I detest so much is like, shoot him, just shoot him, just shoot him, and it's like, no, just shoot him or just choke him out, dude. Take the easy way, and you have to think. It's like, do you understand like any like you think because the utilitarian weight of well, it's good versus evil. It's just that's what you have to pin good versus evil. You have to do things in brushstrokes like that rather than somebody who's severely unwell, like a mentally ill person, which is like usually the case, or um, which could be what not always, but it could be, or somebody marginalized by society, and a voice that's just suffocated by literally um, by people, by their family maybe they could have been abused as a kid. You don't know any of these things. Like you don't know what background, what baggage they're carrying, and to just like deal with it with violence is just gonna make, and then it's just gonna piss even more people off, and it's gonna make it compounding this um like I don't know why I went on about that long. I just kind of so anyway, so after that was the Duelmaster and Other Tales of Terror by Jules Kurlowitz. I thought this was really really interesting. Mythologies by Roland Barthes. Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. The Ponder Heart by Yudira Welty. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Wait, hold up. I forgot to write that down. Okay, I think it was Until August. That was the name? Okay, it was Until, yeah. Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Nobody Belongs Here More Than You by Miranda July. Simulation and okay, Jean Baudelaire. Animal Life by Ava Olafsdatter. I'm sorry, Icelandic name. And I do have a vague hope of maybe this year already, or maybe the year after this, but sometime. It doesn't have to be a January 1st thing, but of reading one author from every nationality. So all some 200, you know, nationalities and countries throughout the planet. So that'd be interesting to do because, yeah, I've noticed a kind of partiality again, a bias towards like Western culture in a way too. Like it's just a lot of stuff. It's like it's kind of because it's like it's also a thing where it's like, well, maybe, but then there's also maybe a slight bias. I think maybe Hoare has put this pretty interestingly. I think he was talking about how the he while he was Portuguese, right? Brazilian. I think it was Portuguese. Sorry, not Portuguese. No, was he? He was Brazil, not Peruvian. But he was in talking about how um the reading stuff like the Spanish Cervantes kind of has the Spanish kind of genealogy tracing back, but it's also um things that he's read in Japanese too. I think and I don't know the exact references, but he was talking about I think he said Joseph Conrad too. I think he said like Joseph Conrad, who wrote in English but was Polish, I think, first by nationality. So, yeah, it's just interesting because it's like there's also a kind of melting pot of all these different heterogeneous kind of, or rather homogeneous ideas, like trans infecting different nations, and like you have different manias and culture manias, and it's like it almost doesn't even matter. Like culture is like a almost like, or sorry, not culture, but country in itself. It's like it's almost like it doesn't matter. I think in the, I don't know, the borders and the stuff that we put up and all that are just kind of for show in a way. And I'm not trying to argue like kind of like, yeah, man, libertarian kind of anarcho kind of do what you want. um, I'm not. I'm just kind of. I mean, I'll probably change my mind tomorrow. I don't know. My politics or my ideas, opinions are just constantly in flux anyway. So, but yeah, I think there's like something to do with with um these different kind of uh speaking through the lens of a different person, but then again also maybe paying homage. Sorry, that's the second time I said that. But homage to all these different the good stuff about like a nation, like like the good stuff about Iceland, like it's like and like the rather than severing the roots, being like watering and nurturing those roots and stuff. But then again, how much of that can might need to nationalism, because there's actually weird resulting forms of different not pan nationalism, but different kinds of nationalism that almost have that don't lead to colonialism. Like I think I just learned about this a feminist who was I think she was Slavic. I can't remember because I just kind of in passing, but somebody was saying she was big on she wrote, she's a kind of accomplished writer, but she also wrote a lot of fiction, and she lived in the like early 20th century, and surprisingly was like like a nationalistic but also feminist as well, like a lot like advocate for female voices. And I just think that's interesting because it's like it's not, I guess it really depends on how, if your kind of patriotism doesn't necessarily mean that you're going about like saying like just because like every that this is the end all, the best kind of objective, um like hierarchy of things where you're like this is the ideal thing, normative kind of thing where you're saying this is the what should be, rather than what happens to work for you, and then you'll let other people, other nations with their different things. Because like then again, it's like there's a lot of, through history there's a lot of violence and like pillaging and stuff like that. The Vikings, in Scandinavian, all their lineage traces back to like pillaging and raping and taking other people's land and pushing out the natives. And then the natives themselves were also uh like related, and their ancestors were different and like mixed up. And then like this, like whether it's um the bar, the like the Goths or the Visigoths, and the Franco kind of things, are like in the endless kind of torrential kind of um mixing of races and stuff like that, with like on the British Isles area of like and then different things. So like the Irish were kind of like taken kind of taken over by the British royalty, and then like these fought back and stuff. And it's just kind of interesting that like all these different kind of, it's not like um it's just because something is a certain way doesn't mean it has to be that way, I guess. And then after that I read some so, Animal Life. After that I read um this is all September, by the way. Okay, so Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. Slowly working my way through her stuff. Um, because I read, I think it was Feminism is for Everybody, which I really liked. Um, really kind of stable view on feminism, like not really a holier than thou, um, kind of morally superior way, but The Dangerous Peak by Gary Snyder. Oh yeah, that was because in Dharma Bums he was mentioned in. I actually read Dharma Bums first because Gary Snyder was equals Zaffi or Jaffe, I think was in the Dharma Bums, which I read before that actually. The order here is kind of off. What to because I'll write stuff down while I'm reading it, just kind of before I forget. In fact, I actually recently read a short story by Tobias Wolff, The Bullet in the Brain, mainly because the show You, in the fourth season mentioned it, so I thought it was like, oh, that's interesting. Like take on death, and like told in a very kind of grisly, but also almost like neurologically kind of true to life, kind of what you'd expect, like of or like existentially of like what you would expect your final moments to be. So I'm definitely, because it's literally 13 minutes. So I saw that and I was like, okay. So yeah, I'd like to review that sometime. But I might want to listen to it again. Maybe 2 or 3 times, like I did with some of Ambrose, uh, Ambrose Bierce's stuff. Like it's just like in the realm of I think it was in the. I have it written down here. Anyway, but yeah, so after that, I read What is a Slave on the 4th of July by Frederick Douglass, because I think I remember reading the Narratives of Life, either that or an abridged kind of excerpts of it as a kid, and for school. Um, Even in the kind of conservative kind of household I was in, but had a curriculum that was like just like pretty much like any other school curriculum. It was just from homeschool most of the time, aside from like first couple of grades, I think. Perfume: The Story of a Murderer by Patrick Zuskind. Um, Choke, Chuck Palahniuk. Slowly, I think I'll slowly work my way through his stuff. I'm not super big on his stuff, but on his style, kind of. There are no flowers. No, wait. There are flowers in Ohio. Rumaan Alam. I heard he was mentioned by someone, but it came up in my wish list, and I thought, hey, it's not too long, so. The Complete Poems by Sappho. Um, yeah, she was yeah, like a very early, Greek poet. Like, um, it's like surprising, like how people, it's translated and they kept her, because I think like a lot of these works, like a lot of you have lacunes and gaps and stuff like that of missing uh like transcripts and translations and stuff like that, and it's just like it might carry over immediately, and then it might have been lost in a fire, like at the Library of Alexandria, like that fire in, oof, I want to say like 400 BC. I'm sorry, 400 AD. I could be totally off there, but that had so many like original stuff in it, like just like it's with Socrates. A lot of what he said is via Plato. It's based all of what he said is via Plato. He's kind of like characterized through him, because he's like, and people actually argue whether or not he was actually a real person, or whether or not he was just kind of a some historians. I'm not sure, but I think like it's generally seen that he was like a real person. So, Kate went in search of its bird by yeah, like I said, Tommy Warren, Jolly Smith, Joseph Corin, Charlie Coffin. Um, Beck is Back by Jean Updike. It's part of the Beck trilogy, I believe. I think there's no, but there's 2 or 3 Beck. I'm not sure if it's a trilogy, but there is the Rabbit trilogy, which is Run Rabbit Run, and 2 other ones. Don't count on me to memorize all of that yet. I've literally just only read the Centaur by John Updike, which is like 4 years ago now. So, The Eye of the Heron, or Ursula K. Le Guin. Yeah, another very interesting kind of the way she melds speculative slash science fiction in a similar way that maybe Octavia E. Butler does, but she's able to kind of meld it with reality in such a way that if you didn't think twice about it, like it seems like almost like exactly like a thing that would happen. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff with that. Blanking on exactly what happened, but yeah, the as I always do. But yeah, the what she was talking about, and that was like basically um akin to a community that's kind of isolated on this like and it's poetically told of like this this heron that kind of goes around, and it's like uh there's like all these descriptions that kind of almost like prose or poetry quality tenor to it, but there's a lot of, it's a very almost like kind of Orwellian a little bit. I know that term's overused. Or Arthur Kastlerian, kind of dystopia realm to it, where there's like the people are conscripted into an armed forces that they otherwise wouldn't want anything to do with, and it's like very the families are torn apart over it, and yeah, there's a lot of these uh classic kind of themes of but like what could be if we keep going down this route of certain things, and that's stuff I really love because Philip Glass does that too with like especially the Man in the High Castle. So the Violet Bear It Away. I'm sorry, I keep wanting to say the Violet. It's the Violent Bear It Away by Flannery O'Connor. I still keep forgetting to do this one. Really great one. There's lots of kind of biblical prophecies to this, where like O'Connor is like um, hinting at a lot of different kind of biblical prophecies that actually happened or that actually were. But it's like this family that are trying to make this little boy of like 12 or 13, I think, and they're trying to make him this, with this other guy. Gosh, I can't remember the characters. This other man is like a family member, distant, like a cousin, like they're all distantly related on this farm area in like rural Louisiana, I believe, or Alabama, somewhere on that turf. They are all interrelated, and they are basically this one guy, the older kind of guy, is like making him out to be this prophet of a kid of a young man who's like biblically supposed to go out there and preach the word, and the Violent Bear is actually a quote, a biblical verse, and I don't know where it is, if it's like in Psalms or if it's in I'm not sure, it's Isaiah maybe, but yeah, the with this book, I like how she uses like kind of shows a difference of like different attitudes towards the young kid, because he's like different, the other I think his cousin is basically saying that like is more educated and more worldly, and says that like he is trying to like get him away from the influence of the uncle. So there's a lot of kind of like like struggles for like control and influence over this young boy that I thought was really tragic, and like also very really like almost like realistic kind of too, because it's like it takes on this like very like violence is like kind of a theme that shows up, and it's told in such a way where it's like almost not it's almost like not something to be discussed. It's almost like something that's like a necessity of life or something. It's just like I don't know. Companion piece by Ali Smith. Another Ali Smith. Travels with Epicurus. Black Water by Joseph Carol Oates. Heron and the Sea, and the stories Solomon Rushdie. That was like a kind of sea of different kind of almost fable stories. Of Happiness by Seneca. The Coma by Alex Garland. The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers. A Thousand Cranes by Yasunari Kawabata again. The Afterlife and Other Stories by John Updike. Oh, I guess I did do that. Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting series of stories. The Higgs Boson and Beyond by Sean M. Carroll. That was just a great courses thing that I kind of intermediate, kind of beginner, because obviously I have no flack anything about physics and anything like that. So don't think I just because I read a lot of books means that I know anything about physics, but I'm trying to learn a little bit, because I heard that Sam Harris podcast he did, which is really, really great. That was basically talking about like Laplace's demon. But yeah, he mentions all that and more in that. So I thought that was really interesting. The Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov, a tragic Russian writer who passed away all too soon, all too young, at the age of like 24, I believe. And that was the only work he did, was A Hero of Our Time. Then Cut and Thirst by Margaret Atwood. My first that I've read by her. The Happy Death by Albert Camus. A Telegraph Boy. Feels like I read Happy Death a lot way before, but maybe because it has similar tones to The Stranger. Anyway, but yeah, The Telegraph Boy by Horatio Alger, kind of a rags to riches kind of thing. I've heard him mention in passing, so I was like, oh, it's like late 1800s or something. I think he talks about in 1890s kind of New York kind of streets of like this paper boy trying to make his way around, and basically, I thought it was kind of boring, no offense, but it was just like, I figured I'd give him a try. I'll just like hear what this guy has to say. I mean, there is like a pretty influential Horatio Alger society of, but it's one of those things that's like the John something society, John Birch Society or something, where I hear about it. I'm not really sure exactly what it's talking about, but it could be totally like negative. Who knows? But anyway, I'm gonna see if I can squeeze this in a couple minutes, but I doubt it. Um, Relativity by Albert Einstein, The Pigeon by Patrick Suskind, The Machine Stops by Ian Forster, The Sound of Waves by Yuki Mishima, Tambourines to Glory, Langston Hughes, The Crucible, Arthur Miller, Human All Too Human, Friedrich Nietzsche, Flush, Virginia Woolf, The King of the Golden River by John Ruskin, Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge and Other Stories, The Analects by Confucius, Pastoral Realia by George Saunders, The Grown Up by Gilliam Flem, In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Tanizaki, Book of Tea by Kakuku Zakari Okakuru. I'm sorry, Okakuru. No, that's his name. The Old Maid by Edith Wharton. Silas Marner by George Eliot. My first, I think. No, I think I read one by her called The Marquise. Or was that George Sand? I think Marquise. They were kind of around similar times, like in the late 1800s. I'm sorry, late 1800s, late 1700s. Butcher's Crossing by John Williams. Crash by J.G. Ballard. This is really hard to get through, although I thought it was pretty brilliant on accounts of just being able to craft a narrative with so much of like this a perverse obsession with car crashes and people. And I might do a thing on this, a review. The Nutcracker and the Mousekin, E.T.A. Hoffman. The Sandman, also by E.T.A. Hoffman. Dreams to Fair to a Middling Woman, Samuel Beckett. That was his first novel when he was about 26 or so. It actually is like, I heard some people mention that it might take a lot, not only his first kind of precepts or influence of James Joyce, but also a kind of he had a kind of avuncular kind of relationship with the young Samuel Beckett, the older Joyce, later in the 1930s and 20s, because he also was Samuel Beckett was said to have had a relationship with James Joyce's daughter, but it's not too sure whether that was real or not.